Before the labors, before the fame, and before the tragedy, there was a lie. A lie so powerful it shook the foundations of the heavens. In the ancient city of Tiryns, Queen Alcmene waited for her husband to return from war. But the man who walked into her chambers that night wasn't her husband. It was Zeus, the king of Olympus, wearing the face of another man. This wasn't just a divine affair, it was a cold, calculated manipulation. Zeus didn't just want a child, he wanted a weapon. He needed a half-mortal hero to protect the gods from a coming darkness, and Alcmene was the vessel for his grand design. But imagine the betrayal. Imagine the psychological toll on a woman who realized the father of her child was a cosmic predator in disguise. This is where the legend of Hercules begins, not in glory, but in a violation of the soul. Zeus, in his arrogance, bragged on Olympus that the child born that night would rule the world. He thought he was playing a game of chess, but he forgot about his queen. Hera, the goddess of marriage, didn't just feel anger. She felt a cold, sharp humiliation that had been building for eons. She didn't just want to kill the child, she wanted to destroy the prophecy. Hera's revenge was biological warfare. She used her divine powers to slow down Hercules' birth, keeping him trapped in the womb in agonizing pain, while she accelerated the birth of his weak, sickly cousin, Eurystheus. In that one moment of celestial sabotage, Hercules was robbed of his kingdom before he even took his first breath. He was born a slave to a coward, a divine prince destined to serve a man who wasn't fit to lace his sandals. But Hera wasn't finished. She wanted to snuff out this bastard while he was still in his cradle. She sent 2 serpents, not ordinary snakes, but creatures of nightmare, infused with her own venomous spite. They slithered into the nursery, their eyes glowing like dying embers. But this is where the world first saw the anatomy of a god. Even as an infant, Hercules didn't cry, he didn't scream. While his twin brother shrieked in terror, Hercules reached out with hands that already possessed the grip of a titan. The sound that night wasn't a baby's cry, it was the sound of bone-crushing muscle. As his mother, Alcmene, burst into the room, she saw her infant son laughing, holding 2 dead monsters as if they were toys. In that terrifying image, the theme of his entire life was set. Hercules would always be surrounded by monsters, and he would always have the strength to crush them. But the biggest monster wasn't a snake or a Hydra. It was the goddess who would spend the next 50 years trying to break his spirit.
Success is a double-edged sword when you have a goddess for an enemy. Hercules had become the ultimate man. He was the savior of Thebes, a prince of war, and a husband to the radiant Princess Megara. He had 3 sons, miniature versions of himself, full of life and laughter. For a few years, it seemed like the gods had finally forgotten him. But peace, for Hercules, was just the silence before the scream. Hera had been watching. Every time Hercules kissed his wife, Hera felt a jolt of humiliation. Every time he held his children, she remembered Zeus's infidelity. She didn't want a quick assassination this time. She wanted to poison the one thing Hercules couldn't protect with his shield, his mind. She descended from Olympus like a toxic fog, carrying a divine madness that was older and darker than the stars. It happened in the dead of night. As the hearth fire flickered, the air turned cold and purple. The madness didn't just blind Hercules, it rewrote his reality. Through his eyes, the warm glow of his home turned into a hellish battlefield. He looked at his wife, Megara, but the goddess had replaced her face with the rotting mask of a fury. He looked at his children, and in his shattered mind, they became the spawn of monsters, crawling toward him with venomous intent. Imagine the horror. The world's strongest man acting on a lie. He didn't just fight, he decimated. With the strength that could move mountains, he struck. The sounds of breaking wood were drowned out by the screams of the only people who ever truly loved him. When the last monster fell and the purple mist finally evaporated, the silence that followed was louder than any thunderbolt. Hercules stood in the center of the room, panting, smelling the copper scent of blood. As his eyes cleared, he didn't see demons. He saw his children. He saw his wife. And he realized that the hands that were meant to protect them had become the tools of their extinction. Hera didn't just break him, she turned him into the very thing he spent his life fighting, a monster. The blood on the floor of his palace had dried, but the blood on Hercules' soul was still fresh. He had lost everything, not to a monster he could fight, but to a madness he couldn't outrun. For months, the greatest hero of Greece wandered the wilderness like a ghost, his massive frame wasting away, his eyes hollowed out by grief. He didn't want glory anymore. He wanted an end. But the gods weren't finished with him. Haunted by the screams of his children, Hercules crawled to the sacred peaks of Delphi, to the oracle who spoke for Apollo. He needed to know if a man who had committed the unthinkable could ever be forgiven. The atmosphere at Delphi was thick with the scent of laurel and ancient secrets. As Hercules knelt in the dark, smoky cavern, the Pythia spoke in a voice that didn't sound human. The decree was a cold iron chain. To wash away the blood of his family, Hercules had to surrender his freedom. He was ordered to travel to the city of Mycenae and serve King Eurystheus for 12 long years. But here was the ultimate psychological torture. Eurystheus was the very man who had stolen his throne. He was a coward, a man Hercules despised, yet now he would be his master. Hercules stood before the gates of Mycenae, his head bowed, his pride crushed. He wasn't entering as a conqueror, he was entering as a slave. Eurystheus, trembling in fear behind his golden guards, looked at the Titan before him and felt a surge of sadistic joy. He knew Hera was watching. He knew that any task he gave Hercules would be a death sentence. "You want redemption?" the king sneered. "Then you will do the impossible. You will face the nightmares of the world, and you will do it in my name." In that moment, the Labors were born, not out of heroism, but out of a broken man's desperate search for a second chance.
The lion was dead, but Hera was only getting started. For the second labor, she sent Hercules into the poisonous depths of the Lerna swamps. Within the thick, acidic mists lived the Hydra, a serpentine nightmare with 9 heads and breath so toxic it could kill a man in a single inhale. This wasn't just a battle of strength, it was a battle against biology itself. Hercules charged the beast, swinging his heavy club and slicing off a head with a single blow. But as the blood hit the swampy ground, horror unfolded. From the stump of the severed neck, 2 new heads sprouted, hissing with even greater fury. For every head Hercules took, the monster grew twice as strong. He was drowning in a sea of snapping jaws and venomous fangs. Realizing that his strength was his own undoing, Hercules called upon his nephew, Iolaus. They devised a brutal but brilliant strategy: fire. As Hercules sliced through a neck, Iolaus would immediately sear the raw wound with a flaming torch, cauterizing the flesh and preventing the heads from regenerating. One by one, they burned through the nightmare. Finally, Hercules reached the immortal middle head. With a final, earth-shaking strike, he severed it and buried it deep beneath a massive boulder, trapping the monster's spirit forever. But before he left, Hercules dipped his arrows into the Hydra's black, toxic blood, creating a weapon that could kill even a god. He won the battle, but he had forged a tool of destruction that would one day lead to his own undoing. After the blood and the fire of the swamps, Eurystheus and Hera devised a labor that couldn't be won by brute force.
They sent Hercules to capture the Cyrenian hind, a creature so sacred and so swift that it belonged to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. This beast was a wonder of the ancient world. Its hooves were made of gleaming bronze, and its massive antlers were of solid gold. But there was a catch. Hercules could not harm it. To spill a single drop of its divine blood was to invite the wrath of Artemis, a goddess who could turn a man into prey with a single thought. The chase didn't last for hours or days. It lasted an entire year. Hercules, the man who could crush lions with his bare hands, was now a silent shadow in the forest. He followed the golden glint of the hind's antlers through the sun-drenched valleys of Greece and into the frozen, unforgiving lands of the north. He learned to breathe with the wind, to move without snapping a twig, and to survive on nothing but focus. This was Hera's psychological trap. She wanted to drive Hercules to frustration, hoping he would lose his temper and kill the animal in a fit of rage. But the madness that had once taken his family had been replaced by a cold, iron discipline. Finally, at the edge of the river Ladon, as the hind paused for a single breath, Hercules acted. He didn't use a spear or sword. With the precision of a god, he fired an arrow that passed harmlessly between the bone and tendon of its forelegs, pinning the beast without a scratch. But as he hoisted the golden creature onto his shoulders, a silver light filled the forest. Artemis herself stood before him, her bow drawn, her eyes cold as starlight. Hercules didn't fight, he knelt. He told the goddess of his slavery, his guilt, and his search for a soul. Moved by his humility, the goddess allowed him to take the hind, proving that sometimes the greatest strength a hero can show is the strength to wait.
The first task Eurystheus commanded was a death sentence disguised as a hunt. In the valley of Nemea, a nightmare had taken root. A massive lion, spawned from the monster Typhon, was terrorizing the land. But this was no ordinary predator. Its fur was as hard as diamond, and its skin was impenetrable by any blade forged by man. Arrows bounced off its ribs like pebbles, spears shattered against its hide. The Nemean lion wasn't just a beast, it was an invulnerable wall of muscle and teeth. Hercules entered the valley alone. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of dry bones under his sandals. When he first encountered the beast, he fired his bow with the precision of a master, but the arrows simply fell to the ground, useless. He struck it with his bronze sword, and the blade snapped in half. It was in that moment of cold realization that Hercules understood. To defeat a monster that couldn't be wounded, he had to become a monster himself. He tracked the lion to a two-mouthed cave, blocking one exit with massive boulders. Inside the darkness, the air smelled of rotting meat and ancient blood. As the lion leaped, its roar shaking the very earth, Hercules didn't retreat. He dropped his broken weapons and met the beast with his bare hands. It was a primal struggle of god strength against beast fury. The lion's claws ripped through Hercules' skin, but he didn't let go. He wrapped his massive arms around the creature's neck in a lethal embrace. For hours they wrestled in the shadows, until finally the snapping of the beast's neck signaled the end of its reign. Hercules emerged from the cave not just as a survivor, but as a warrior wearing the invulnerable skin of his fallen enemy, a mantle that would make him truly legendary.